went last week. Had a family emergency. It wasn't a vacation, but now we're back to resume our Monday school education. And those of you who have friends and families around the world, you should ask them to tune in. You should ask them to go to newspecies.com where you are. And you should also ask them to download the app so they can get the education we do on history and that we do also on health. You all know about New Species, the natural health company. We help people with their physical health, and we have been helping thousands of people around the world for the last 20 or so years. And now we have new history where we're using it to help people with mental health and spiritual health. A lot of you have told me over the years how you suffer the anguish because of what's happening in the world today and what has happened to our ancestors in the past. So we do Monday school like Sunday school to educate you on history and spirituality so that you can get spiritual healing, you can get mental healing. A lot of you also have told me that you have found Monday school to be extremely helpful to you. So again, reach out to family and friends anywhere in the world so they can tune in now. We have a lot to talk about. We are not going to get through all of that I have prepared, but we always have next week. So invite friends and families to listen in. So we're going to talk about new history and in particular Black history and Black culture, African culture. That's what we reserve this one time of the week to talk about. And you can record it if you want and share it with friends and family. So Black folks are skipping past. I'm going to beat up on Black folks a lot today, actually. Black folks are all around the world are skipping past the real and natural life of today because we're trying to avoid the mental and spiritual anguish we are all suffering. It's how we seem to survive the violence of today against us. Skipping to the imagined life, I like to call it, of the spirit world, of sacred divine spirituality, because it's so imbued in us, it's so deeply rooted in us. It's likely how we survive the way we have to survive to this day is because of the deep spirituality that we have in us. But instead of worshiping the God of judgment and the God of resurrection and the God of forgiveness and redemption, who gave the world the rich culture that we will discuss soon, we worship the God of vengeance and death, or we just pretend to. This God who approves of genocides in Deuteronomy, in Joshua, in 1 Samuel's mass murder and genocides of even innocent women and children that we will talk to a little bit as well. So we also worship the God that sanctions the world's calls for weapons of mass destruction used against humans today. Look at all the wars and conflicts around the world right now, destroying innocent people, innocent women, innocent children. We still wait, asking God to come from the spirit world to rescue us. from the evils of this physical world. But black folks in particular are playing by their own rules. We are playing by our own rules that the world could not care less about. It seems we are the only people who fear God's wrath and judgment by being denied access to the afterlife. That's what we fear, right? We fear being denied access to the afterlife. We fear being denied access to heaven. So we receive the brutal attacks and turn the other cheek, because God will punish the evildoer in the next life, in the spirit world. That's what a lot of us actually believe. We expect God to deny the evil ones access to the afterlife, and that's what we continue to believe. Clearly, this world is a kind of foreign place to us, and a lot of us actually just don't fit in. A lot of us can't fit in. So we haven't forgotten, though, the past, and that's part of the reasons why we have so much anguish. We walk around with so much pain. The genocides, the exploitations, swept over Africa, still sweeping over Africa. Even the slavery and colonialism. Colonialism is now called neo-colonialism in Africa. And it's just an endless river of trauma to those who survive and pass those genes to us. And we do have those genes that are damaged. And that's part of the reason why we have the mental and spiritual pain. We're layered with trauma. All of us with pain, with suffering, we're passing to our children and our grandchildren unless we can rise to the heights of sacred divine spirituality and worship the God of love, worship the God of forgiveness, worship the God of the resurrection. But first, we must fully and consciously embrace the pain. To overcome the pain and mental anguish, we must know and accept what the truth is, what the facts are, because a lot of you have told me you don't know what the facts are. You're still trying to find what the truth is. So we must know that God is God based on our sacred texts of the Cushite Kemites. And that's what you all need to turn to. And that's what we all need to read, to study, to understand. Because from these sources, we will find mental and spiritual therapy, better health. So let's begin with God. So the original God in our sacred Cushite Kemites text is called Atum, Atum. And some believe, I am still thinking that it could be true that this God got renamed and rebranded to the God of today. But if that's the case, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we should think of is the creation of the world, and in particular, the creation of our culture, the African culture, that's written in those texts. That's what we specifically will talk about today. And we're going to give you some quotes from those texts, and I invite you to Google, or do your own research so you can see it for yourself. Whatever we say here, we want you to see it for yourself. Whatever we say here, we want you to do the research for yourself, because you need to see the truth yourself. So we're going to talk about the creation of African culture in particular. And I think it is also the creation of world culture. So the sacred divine spirit is the God force in our sacred texts that create heaven and earth. And it's very, very similar to the Bible. So after heaven and earth passes away, the sacred divine spirit world will return. And that's what the Bible also says. This is also specified in the Cushite Chemite text, as I'm going to give you some examples in a few minutes. So everyone and everything eventually travels back to the sacred divine spirit world. That's the way it's seen from the Bible and our sacred texts. So greed and wealth and power destroy sacred spirituality as it is in the world today. And with it, the culture, the heritage, the history of divine spirituality got destroyed as well. So the sacred texts of the Kushite Kemet speak to one God. I know a lot of you have read history books and you have been taught that the Africans have many gods, but it's a misinterpretation of those texts. The Africans have one from ancient times, going back the last maybe 10,000 years. The Africans have had one supreme God. And yes, there were other gods, but the other gods were humans who lived on earth, who did great things for the earth and for human culture and for African culture. They did huge things, great accomplishments. And that's why they were deified. That's why they were made into gods. So those are the gods that are being referred to in the history books as gods that the Africans worship. No, they worship one supreme God, but yes, their ancestors. Those of you who know African ancestry very well, you'll know that the Africans worship their ancestors to worship the supreme God, just as the way the culture is layered with spiritual and religious worship. So Adam has many names. One of the original names is Ptah, P-T-A-H. So Adam or Ptah or Ra or Re is the one supreme God that's written in the texts of the Africans. So these are the texts. Write it down. The pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead is a name given in the English language. The original name is the Per-em-Huru, and that I will explain at some point. But Pyramid Text 1655 specifically says that God rises from the primordial waters. In the Bible, it says primordial as well. But in the Bible, it says it's from the spirit world. Primordial here means the same thing. And then the papyrus of Ani, in a hymn to Ptah, dating to the 22nd dynasty of Egypt, says, Ptah crafted the world in the design of his heart. The Shabaka stone of the 25th dynasty says, Ptah gave life to all the gods. Ptah gave life to all the gods. So this is an indication right here that there's one supreme God and then there are other gods. So there's a God of gods. And then it says Ptah created everything. But let's skip down to texts that are even more specific. The Papyrus of Nu, it is in the British Museum right now. The Papyrus of Nu, N-U. The Papyrus of Nu says, God declares, I am God. The Papyrus of Ani states, it too is in the British Museum, the Papyrus of Ani. It says, Ra, or God, is the father of the gods. So these are different texts that are saying the same thing, that there's one supreme God. among the Africans. The Papyrus of Ani also states, O God, and I'm going to read exactly the translation. O God, the divine man child, the heir of eternity, self begotten, self born, king of the earth, and king of all gods. That is the Papyrus of Ani. And again, those texts are in the British Museum. So there you have it, people. And then there's a plaque that was found, and the plaque was written about 5 or 6,000 years ago. That would make it about 2,000 years before ancient Egypt. And on the tile plaque, it was discovered by an archaeologist in Great Britain. It says on the tile plaque, devoted to one God. Devoted to one God. The people are devoted to one God. So those of you who want to find that plaque, you could Google the Anu, the first people. The Anu, the first people. So that's what the tile plate says. So there have been many. Why is this important? There have been many who says that the Africans worship many gods, or they're idolaters, or they're sexual deviants. And a lot of these labels, like being heathens, were used as justification to destroy some of the civilizations in Africa. And it led to a lot of genocides. And you all need to understand that in Genesis 9, verse 24 to 27, Noah says that Africans should be slaves and servants of Japheth and Shem. And a lot of people take it seriously. And that too led to a lot of the genocides in Africa. And if you want to see the biblical language on that, go to Deuteronomy 20, verse 16. Go to Joshua 6, verse 21. Go to 1 Samuel 15, verse 2. And then, people, just read the book of Ezekiel. Read the book of Jeremiah. Read the book of Nahum in the Bible. And it is written in such excruciating details about how Africans were put to the sword. From Canaan, and by the way, Canaan today is now the land of Jordan and Israel and Palestine. And that's where the genocides of Africans began, in that land. It's so sad to see the bloodshed and destruction taking place there today. But we're not here to talk about Canaan. We're going to mention it again. But for more than 2,500 years, and this is before Africa was called Africa or Al-Kibilan, the name of Africa, the true name of Africa in the sacred texts of the Kushite Kemites is Tanetja. Tanetja. Tantrgr or GW. Tanetja. And it means holy land. It means the land of God. That's what Tanetja means. And Tanetja had many holy shrines and temples. From Napata, and some of you, I know you have never heard these names before, but Napata is a place today in Sudan, and it was a holy land. It was a holy shrine was built there. It was destroyed by the Romans, but That's part of the holy land of Tanejer that the sacred texts are speaking to. And then there are others like El Kuru and Nuri, and then there are others in Kemet, or, Kemet was renamed Egypt. So Tanejer, Holy Land, the land of God, that was the original name of Africa. And that is the birthplace of, I spoke to it just now, forgiveness and redemption. And a lot of you who have talked to me, you wonder why Africans or black people are able to sustain uh, the violence against us and we don't fight back. I personally believe it is because of the divine spirituality that's still in us somewhere, and especially the divine spirituality of forgiveness and redemption and the fear of going to hell or fear of burning in hell. And at some point, we're going to discuss that in more details. But we're talking about Taneja. So, what happened in Africa? What actually happened? So, before 10,000 BC, and this is what history shows, before 10,000 BC, there was a massive torrid heat wave that started in southern Africa, and that caused a massive migration of the people from South Africa, from East Africa, from West Africa to North Africa. Why? Because, like today, a lot of the lakes and rivers in southern Africa, they dry up. Some of them dry up even if there are no rain for 2 or 3 years. So about 10,000 years ago, there was a massive migration to northern Africa from southern, east, and west Africa. But before we get to that, there's one thing that you should understand. All of history has shown that human civilizations only flourish long term beside water sources, only beside large bodies of water like rivers and lakes. So that will give you a little background in what I'm going to say now. So Homo habilis and Homo erectus, two of the first humans that's in recorded history by our archaeologists and paleoanthropologists have shown along the Rift Valley, along the Olduvai Gorge, right by Kenya and Tanzania. That's where this human population lived for thousands of years. Homo habilis and Homo erectus. Do the research on that. And then came the 7 million year people of the Tugen Hills in Kenya, but we have no evidence of any lake or any river body that were in this part of Kenya. But the oldest human remains that have been found on Earth are over 7 million years old. As for Homo habilis and Homo erectus, they're between 3 and 2 million years old. And then there was Lucy in Ethiopia, and Lucy was about 3.1 million years ago. And of course, you know that Lake Tana is the lake that feeds the Nile River that runs into the Mediterranean Ocean today. So that's Lake Tana in Ethiopia. I mentioned the Tugen's people, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and Lucy. Keep in mind that these people live in the land of Tanejer. They lived in the land of Tanejer. They live in the Holy Land. They live in the land of God as written in the text, the sacred text of the Kushite Kemites. So you should keep that in mind as we go forward. So these lands got renamed to Ethiopia. They got renamed to Tanzania. They got renamed to Kenya, just as how Kush was renamed. It was originally called Nubia. It got renamed to Kush by the Bible, and of course Ethiopia is also written in the Bible as is Kush. and then Kemet got renamed to Egypt. So what happened here, people? All the African lands that got renamed, once they get renamed, the culture got lost. The culture got lost. And you know where the culture is now? Visit the major museums in the whole world, including the United States. That's where you'll find probably most of African culture. I went to the Louvre in Paris, and I was stunned to see that it's by the way, the Louvre is a huge museum. It's huge. And almost 2 floors of the Louvre is occupied by primarily African culture, African artifacts, and that's the same all over the world. So you have to understand what happens here. A lot of us, I didn't know that. I did not know that until I went to the Louvre some years ago. So I mentioned the British Museum. I think between France and Great Britain, they probably have the largest collection of African culture on the earth. And I'm sure they have more than in all the 52 or 55 African countries. I'm sure those 2 places have more African culture in their museums than all of Africa. If that is not a shame, I don't know what's a shame. So the Africans don't know their own culture. The Africans, diaspora outside of Africa, we don't know our own culture unless you visit museums. So that is something to keep in mind. We're talking about mental and spiritual anguish. And I think I'm going to say this, a people who doesn't know their culture, doesn't know their heritage, are people who are lost. And that accounts for why there are so many people who come to me personally in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And they would tell me when they listen to Monday School, they cry. They literally weep in getting the knowledge, especially when they do the research on their own, especially when they talk to their own pastors or their own reverends or bishops who confirm a lot of what I say to them. They weep. So just imagine the anguish and the pain that these people carry around. Imagine the pain and anguish that you all are carrying around. I think we all need therapy. I'm going to say a few more things and I'm going to take a break. So yes, these museums have a massive collection of our culture that we don't know about. And yes, we are people who have no heritage, we have no culture, we have no history because it's in private collection. And as a result of that, we lock our connection to the original supreme God and to the original sacred divine spirituality, because in the culture, that's where the presence of God is. In the culture and the heritage, that's where spirituality lie. And if we don't have it on a daily basis to see it and practice it, it's forgotten. All it takes is a couple generations and we will forget it. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the evolutionary changes in Earth, during the glacial periods and the torrid, hot periods that led to the massive migration of Africa going north up to Kush and up to Kemet, and how this massive migration, they migrated with massive amount of knowledge that they use to build the edifices, the monuments in Kush and Kemet. We're going to talk about that when we come back. I have helped so many of you over the last 15, 20 years. I've helped you with high blood pressure, with diabetes, with cancer, autoimmune diseases, sickle cell diseases. I have helped tens of thousands of you worldwide. And you don't even know who I am. You don't even know my name. But I'm going to tell you my name. I am Aston Farquharson. I am the founder of New Species Corporation. I am the CEO and president of New Species Corporation. And I want to thank you all for allowing me and my team at New Species to help you. And I hope over the next weeks and months and years to come, we will be able to help many more of you. But in the meantime, I want to talk to you about human history. Human history based on science, based on DNA science, based on paleoanthropology, and all the discoveries that have been made, and human history, human evolution. So I'd like to share some of the knowledge I have about human history. The what, when, where of human history, and in the end, how I believe human history play a role in our health, in our diets, and how its knowledge can help us to live longer and better. I will begin with one piece of land located between the Mediterranean Sea and Tanzania, and one lake that we all should consider a lake that is like the mother of God, the mother of mankind. And this lake is called Lake Nile Valley. It was renamed Lake Victoria by the British about 100 years ago. So let's talk about this one strip of land. It is not separated by oceans. It is not separated by seas. It's not separated by water, stretching from Egypt to Tanzania. So this one piece of land has an area called Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, right by the Rift Valley, not far from Kenya. Olduvai Gorge is where scientists and paleoanthropologists believe the first humans and Earth appear. 1.9 million years ago, the Homo habilis appeared there. Thereafter came Homo erectus about 1.2 million years ago. But even before habilis and erectus, Lucy existed about 3.2 million years ago. So why is this piece of land so important? From Tanzania to Kenya to Ethiopia to Somalia to Eritrea to Sudan to Nubia to ancient Egypt. All these countries had tribal kingdoms existing there for probably 10,000 years. And these people very likely emerge from Homo erectus. Homo sapiens emerged around 1 million years to 500,000 years ago. So these tribal kingdoms And this one piece of land may be the people who created the first kingdoms on earth, the first villages on earth, the first civilizations on earth, the first empires on earth. And that's why we're going to talk about them. Lake Nile Valley, or Lake Victoria, is located right by Tanzania and is abutted by several other countries. But what's important about Lake Nile Valley is that Olduvai Gorge is right around the corner from Lake Nile Valley. What does it mean? Water. Lake Nile Valley feeds today, as in ancient times, many rivers flowing south into Africa. But even more importantly, Lake Nile Valley feeds the Nile River, the entire Nile Valley, the White Nile, the Blue Nile. It feeds all the countries I have just mentioned, and it runs from Tanzania into the Mediterranean Ocean. That is how important the Nile River is to the Nile dwellers who have lived there for over 10,000 years. In some cases, there are artifacts showing that they may have lived along the Nile for at least 30,000 years. From all indications, Homo habilis and Homo erectus, as well as the early Homo sapiens, seem to have fed about 80 to 90% on sedges and other fruits and vegetables. That's what they ate, all the way up through to modern times. In the Nile Valley, where farming began on the Sahara, farming began there probably about 10,000 years ago. And these Nile dwellers and Saharans were eating millet, sorghum, chickpeas, and other tubers that they could grow. And again, they ate some fish and some meat, but it doesn't seem that they were eating more than perhaps 10% meat. Again, it was between 80 and 90% fruit and vegetables, and then we could add now tubers like yams and potatoes. So you could say that these tribal kingdoms didn't do so bad in building their civilizations because these people were able to build edifices like stela, pyramids, temples. They were able to build extraordinary irrigation systems and dams. They dug many wells, deep wells, for water during the drying up of the landscape. And all the other extraordinary culture in artifacts, arts, architecture, science, astronomy, engineering, that these people engage in at an extremely high level before 3000 BC, possibly before even 4000 BC, 4,000 years before Christ. That is how extraordinary these people were. And the Nazlet, the Atarians, are the next group of people and cultures like those who created the first commercial and industrialized systems that are known to man. that engage in trade practices, and they built administrative system and other institutions. You could say all the tribal kingdoms from these countries, they form the early beginning of human culture, and they forge some of the greatest knowledge and inventions in human history. So we're going to talk about these people because these tribal kingdoms are the group of people who formed what are now known today as the Kushites and the Egyptians, that's written about so extraordinarily in the Bible and other historical texts, that's been written about by some of the most respected scholars and ancient historians who ever lived. So we're going to talk about all that, and I'm going to share all this information with you, and hopefully at the end of this discussion you'll be able to understand better about human history and human evolution, and how you may need to live today to be able to live better and longer. Okay, welcome back to Monday School. I hope you are following along quite well. We are going to get back on track to the migration from southern, east, and west Africa to northern Africa, just to give you a very little perspective, and then you can do the research on your own. Again, a lot of this is in the Medineta language that we discussed a couple of weeks ago, which is the sacred language of the Kushite Kemites that was renamed hieroglyphics. So the original name is the Medineta. You could do research on that. It's spelled MDWNTR, Medineta. That's the original language of the Kushite Kemites that got renamed to hieroglyphics. And when it got renamed, about 400 to 500 words were added to the language that changed the language, that corrupted the language, and led to very, very bad misinterpretation and mistranslation of the Medineta language. But let's get back to the mass migration. So in the evolutionary changes that I mentioned before in Africa, and the world, it's not just Africa, it's the world. You know, at some point there were glaciers in Africa. There were glaciers all over the world. So the world goes through the evolutionary process of changes from hot to cold, cold to hot. It's just natural evolution. So in Africa, there were mass migrations from southern Africa to northern Africa, as there were from northern Africa to southern Africa at some other point. But we're talking about the migration now because it's more recent, of the southern Africans moving north. So the people of Africa, because of the torrid hot conditions, and the records show that there were just a lot of people who died because of the heat. It probably didn't react um, fast enough, but the animals, the plants, they just died out because of the global climate change that we're told that we're headed for now. Well, some of us believe it, some don't. I believe it, but the migration was huge, and what you need to understand is that the Nile River today is today fed by what's called the White Nile and the Blue Nile from Ethiopia and from Tanzania. And again, this is also part of the Holy Land, the land of God, Tanejer, all the way down to Southern Africa, is the Kushite Kemites wrote in their sacred texts that this land is called the Tanejer, which is the land of God, the Holy Land. So those two Niles today feed the main Nile that runs into the Mediterranean Sea. But there was a third Nile. There was a Nile or a river from Chad. It's dried up now. So there was also a mass migration from Chad and those lands over in West Africa, Mali, and the migration was all to Northern Africa as well. So the Nile of Chad was called the Yellow Nile, and it had fed the current Nile we have today that runs into the Mediterranean Sea. So the people of Chad, they migrated north, and they carried their knowledge. And also the people migrated from Southern Africa to escape the torrid climate change. They brought their knowledge. And you know that in Southern Africa, we have, it's still there today, what's called Adam's calendar, the first astronomical calendar on the earth. You should just research it. And we have prior episodes of Monday School where it was discussed extensively. So all that knowledge about the stars, about the Orion constellation, the Sirius star, the Milky Way galaxy, and other star systems were observed and studied by the Southern Africans up to 75,000 years ago, as been reported by a lot of historians and paleoanthropologists. So all that knowledge went north. And the migration also account for the 4 major language groups that comprise the Medinata language of the Africans. 4 major language groups. And this is how you'll see the migration patterns in the name of these languages. The first is the Niger Saharan or the Niger Congo languages. Keep in mind now that Congo is right down there, like Niger. It's right down there by Lake Nile Valley that exists today, but Lake Nile Valley, as some of you know, was renamed Lake Victoria. So the Medinata language of the Kushites, Kemites, in there are words and patterns and culture in the language indicating the Niger Congo language group. And then there is the Nilo-Saharan languages as well, the Afro-Asiatic languages that are part of the Medinata language of the Kushite Kemites. And then finally, you have the Bantu languages from Southern Africa, and you also have the Khoisan languages from Southern Africa that are also part of the Medinata language that was renamed hieroglyphics. So the Medinata language itself, the Africans call it the language of God. They call it the sacred language. So you can see that this massive culture from Southern Western and Eastern Africa all went north to escape the torrid hot conditions of those regions in the south, because a lot of the lakes in the south dried up, a lot of the rivers dried up, a lot of the animals died, a lot of people died. It was just mass starvation based on what historians have reported. So that's how Kush was formed. That's how Egypt was formed. The migration came from southern, west, and East Africa. So the migrants took all their knowledge in metallurgy and stone engineering from Chad and from Mali. They also brought extraordinary knowledge in mummification. So mummification didn't begin in Kush or Egypt. It actually, the first signs of it were found in Mali, or the first discovery of that knowledge was in Mali, as is engineering. And the whole idea of astronomy at Adam's calendar and Naphtha. So you all should, when you get some time, just do some research on Adam's calendar and Naphtha. So Adam's calendar was over 70,000 years ago. Naphtha was over 10,000 years ago. So that knowledge from Southern Africa, Adam's calendar in astronomy or astrophysics to some extent, migrated with the migrants to Naphtha in Nubia. Of course, you know that Nubia was renamed Kush, and that is also part of Tanetjer, the Holy Land, the land of God. Nubia, Kush, that's also called Ethiopia, all the way down to Southern Africa. So the point here is that the astrophysics at Naphtha is well known over the world now, and Adam's calendar, and all that knowledge went to Kush and Kemet, and it helped to the Kushites and the Kemites to build the 300 pyramids in Kush and over 200 pyramids in Kemet. So all this knowledge, that's where it came from. So the megalith and monoliths of Adam's calendar and Naphtha were not invented and built by aliens. I understand that some history books still say that, unfortunately. And some colleges and universities seem to still teach that, which is unfortunate. The pyramids were not built by aliens. The African supreme god and African sacred divine spirituality are not myth from a mythical god. It was real. It was written in the sacred texts of the Kushite Kemites. Sacred divine spirituality is not dead people. It's just missing from the hearts of men. It was not destroyed by the powerful few. It was not destroyed by the history books and the colleges and universities. It's still out there among many, but not most. So these Africans who build these monuments like the pyramids were not mythical, they were real. Thousands of texts details their names and where they lived and how they lived with God and spirituality, what they invented, what they built, what they created. Thousands of pages of the text is in them. The pyramid texts, the coffin texts, the Per Huru, or the Book of the Dead. So please stop accepting these false or incorrect narratives from the history books. We believe that the Bible also plays a role in creating a lot of what's happening in the world today. We mentioned Genesis 9. Go back and read the whole chapter. We mentioned Joshua, and we mentioned other books in the Bible like Nahum. Please go back and read them, and you will see what I'm talking about. And you need to decide for yourselves whether what you're hearing from the sacred texts of the Kushite Kemites whether it's true or not, you have to determine that. But you need to do the research. You need to find the facts yourselves. Just read the text and you will see it. So these biblical passages led to genocides in Canaan, in Kemet, and Cush. And unfortunately, these were the lands of Ham in the Bible. You all have heard of Ham. Ham had 3 sons, Cush, Mizraim, and Canaan. Canaan was in the land of Canaan when that part of the world, or the Middle East, was part of Africa. That's where Canaan was, the son of Ham, who is African in the Bible. The Bible says he's African. And then Mizraim was in Kemet, renamed to Egypt. And then, of course, there was Cush. So these are the 3 sons who form one of the greatest civilization the world has ever seen. And as the Bible has said, they all were destroyed. Their culture was destroyed. Their heritage was destroyed. The sacred divine God that they worship was changed, and I'm not going to go a lot into it, but it was changed. Next week you could tune in. We're going to go some more into it. Was changed, I believe, into other religions today. And now this sacred divine God that's written in those texts of the Cushite Kemites is now a God of vengeance, a God that command the destruction of children and women who are innocent to the world. So we're going to discuss some more of that next week as well. But I would like you all to do the research yourselves so you can see what we're talking about. Unfortunately, Canaan is in the Bible. Go read it. And it's in those books I mentioned, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Samuel's. First Samuel's, read it. And now Canaan is back in the news today. Yes, the land of Canaan that existed when it was populated by the Africans, the people who are called the so-called Black Israelites, but they weren't Israelites. They were just Canaanites. They were Africans. And today Canaan is back in the news. It's so sad to see that these 3 places, Palestine, Egypt, Jordan, well, Jordan is not in the conflict that's raging now with all the death that's taking place and the violence that's taking place. But here is Canaan again, being soaked in blood once again, as it was in the Bible. So do the research, people, and you will see what Noah's word. I don't believe Noah said those words. Sorry, I don't believe it. I believe man, the powerful few, wrote these things in the Bible for power and wealth. That's what I believe. I believe it was put in there for power and wealth. And Noah's words inspired biblical genocides around the world, not just in Canaan, in all of Africa and around the world, because men believe that they can kill and God will forgive them. Go read Matthews. You see in Matthews where supposedly God forgive all evils except blasphemy. So you can commit genocide and still go to heaven. If you believe that, you should expect to see Hitler in heaven. If before he died he asked God for forgiveness, he's likely in heaven with God, if that's what you believe. So go back and read these texts. Next week we're going to continue this. We have a lot more on this and the migration and how Northern Africa, which includes Cush and Kemet, how it was built and how that culture was destroyed, and how if we still had that culture today in the world, I think the world would be a much better place than it is today. So see you then.